Well, I am really excited today to introduce Rosemary Moscow. She wrote this beautiful book called There Are No Ants in This Book. Now, Rosemary, one thing that struck me is listening to an interview with you recently and how you talked about connecting books and cartoons to help connect people to the natural world. And I heard you refer to yourself as a science communicator. So I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about this passion for the natural world, where it all began, and how you continue to foster it.
Yeah, so I've been interested in telling people facts about nature since I was a little kid. I was one of those little kids who'd read a fact and then I had to tell everybody. And I think I learned early on that people were more interested in facts if there was a joke attached to them. There's something about making science funny that spreads it all over the place. I made a cartoon a while back about bogs and how great they are, and I feel like I've been trying to tell people about bogs for years. And then I made a cartoon with some funny jokes, and suddenly it was spreading all over the place, and people were talking about bogs. And I was like, oh, I see what's happening. So I think I've always done this since I was a little kid. And I also used to read a lot of newspaper cartoons, and I got obsessed with them. And I thought, well, what if I made cartoons about what I was enjoying, but in a newspaper cartoon format and added some humor? And so that's what I've been doing for years and years is that kind of stuff too. And picture books are just another way to be funny and share those kinds of facts. And the term science communicator is kind of a new term. It's maybe, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years old. But that's someone who does some research and talks to scientists and then talks to members of the public and acts as sort of a go-between, tries to make the scientists understand people and people understand the scientists.
That's so interesting. And what a really cool role, right? Something you wouldn't think about. But when I think about children looking at their own passions and how can they then take those passions and run with them to make a difference in the world. And you're a perfect example of someone who's done that. The publisher describes this book as a meta picture book. Can you talk about what that term means and why you chose that approach?
Yeah, so a meta picture book is, well, it's a little hard to describe, but it's a picture book that's sort of talking directly at the reader. So it's a picture book that kind of like winks or plays with the idea of being an actual book and sort of is aware that it's a book. And the book is kind of talking to you and saying, hey, we're all in on this joke, that we're all reading this book and we're all enjoying this. And I have always loved those kinds of books. As a kid, it made me feel really special reading meta picture books, especially. I mean, everybody talks about the monster at the end of this book is, one of the most famous ones, the Sesame Street book. But those books just always made me feel like the author was letting me in on a cool joke. So I like making books like that because I feel like kids enjoy that kind of humor. They understand when there's sort of this extra level of humor, and then it kind of brings them into the story and with a wink and kind of makes them feel like they're part of a club. At least that's how I feel when I read them.
Yeah, I agree. It's that breaking that fourth wall.
Hmm.
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
it adds a whole nother dimension to the experience for sure. Now, since it is your passion to connect readers to the natural world, tell us about the research you undertook in particular with writing this book, and then that decision making you had to do about kind of teaching the facts in this lighthearted, humorous manner, but then you would go a little bit deeper with some more information and then the factual information in the back matter. So talk about that whole process.
Well, so I do way more research for any of these projects than is probably necessary. I love doing research. So I read a ton of papers, I read a ton of books. There's one book in particular that I really liked called, I think it's Empire of Ants, which came out. And there's also a science fiction or horror story called Empire of Ants. So it's not that one. There's one that's a nonfiction book. But I read a bunch of different books about ants. I read a whole bunch of scientific papers. I talked to some ant researchers. There's a fellow named Alex Wild who is especially helpful because he's taken a lot of amazing macro photos of ants. And go to his website. He is just a leading photographer in all of these little incredible different kinds of ants. He's traveled all over and he gets like up really close to them. So I just put together huge lists of interesting facts about ants. And then I had to whittle them down, which was really challenging. One thing that, my editor always laughs about, but I always try to put a butt joke in there because I think they're funny. My niece and nephew do. So there's one type of ant that when it leaps out of a tree, it flies down butt first. And I just thought that was so funny. So I had to find a butt joke in there somewhere. But yeah, it's just a process of gathering as many cool facts as I can, and then whittling them down. And then also trying to be representative, so big ones, small ones, ones you can find where I live, in the U.S. in the backyard, and then ones that live really far away. So I was just trying to be really broad. And then I like that picture books these days enable us to have different layers of information. I think that's really cool. So um, I like when kids can kind of explore in almost like a fractal way, where if there's a fact they like, then there's more information in the back, and then they can jump out and learn even more information. So I always love when they let me put a whole bunch of really cool back matter facts in the back, just more, more, more.
It is so true that you're right. You can read it through just with the humorous end of things, and then where you're called upon to want to go deeper, you have that information there. So it's extremely well done. Kids love humor, so you know your audience well when you're incorporating that. And they do lo absolutely love learning more about the natural world and finding those most unusual facts, things that, especially something as common as an ant, and then to be really have the sense of awe and wonderment about them. That's what this kind of book brings to us, which I love. Was there something in particular that you found out that was really surprising or extraordinary during your research of ants?
Yeah. So I think the strangest thing to me was, so I grew up watching a lot of nature documentaries, and I felt like they were almost always about places that were really far away from me. So I had this idea that the coolest stuff was the farthest from me, and I would never get to see it, or if I did, I'd take, a 20-hour plane ride or something. And one thing that stood out to me when I was researching this book that I think is true of almost everything cool in nature is that a lot of this good stuff is right in my backyard where I live. So I haven't found an acorn ant colony. I really want to. I found some acorns with little holes in them, but you can go out and find these ants where the entire colony lives in a little acorn. And I was recently in Texas, and I came across leafcutter ants, which are these amazing ants. They partner with a fungus, and they pick these pieces of leaf, and they take them back to their nest, and then they use it to grow this fungus, which they eat, which only lives in these ant colonies. And I didn't know they were in Texas.
Mhm.
I was blown away. I thought, oh, I'd have to go somewhere really far away. And here they are right here. So I think one of the things that always stands out to me is that the really cool stuff is right in our backyard, especially things involving insects, because they're so accessible. They're all over the place and they're really overlooked. So if there's some really cool thing that you're interested in, you don't have to go really far away, and you don't have to sit on your couch and watch a show. You can go outside and find these things.
It's a great message. Kind of slow down and take in what we have surrounding us, and this awe of nature is just always extraordinary. And the peacefulness we find that when we spend more time. I think COVID was one of the things that really brought that to the forefront for everybody to get more involved and connected to nature.
Yeah, I found that really wonderful. There were more people out on the trails. I'm really into bird watching. There were more people bird watching than ever. And it felt amazing to show people this, this peace and calm that I found is like right outside. And, I was thinking about when I first started to study nature, and I used to live in a lot of big cities. And again, I had the sense that nature was really far away. And I remember coming across my first carnivorous plant when I was walking around the wilds in Vermont. And I didn't realize we had those there. So it's so good when people are just going right out in their backyard. And, if there's some cool piece of nature that you like that seems far away, try to see if there's an analogous one here. And there usually is.
Excellent, excellent messages. We seek out books that are fully illustrated. So we think of a picture book as having just a limited amount of real estate. So we absolutely adore when an illustrator takes advantage of the board cover and the end papers. So I'm really curious with you being the author and then having to hand over your text to someone else. And I'm sure you probably didn't have any contact with the illustrator for the most part. I don't think you authors do. What happened during that process that was actually delightful to you when you finally get approved to see what the illustrations, how they really did add on to your text?
So the illustrator for this book is Anna Paroli, and she lives in Italy. So I did not ever have a chance to meet her, and I still haven't. If anyone wants to send me to Italy, please do. But I'm not a book illustrator. I'm not a trained illustrator. It's a whole other skill that I don't have, and I find it so wonderful. I feel so lucky when I get back sketches and art because picture book illustrators I mean, they are like 50% or more of the whole process. They create a narrative in the illustration. that you wouldn't necessarily, like a parallel narrative that you wouldn't necessarily expect as a writer. And I try to put guidance in my scripts or in my text, but I also, I try not to go overboard. I try to look at what the illustrator likes to draw and figure out ways we can incorporate that. But when I get stuff back, it's full of things that I would never have expected. So one thing was the kid character in this book. I didn't even think about what this kid would look like. I had no idea. And Anna, added all this like this bright hat and all of this. I said there had to be a hat, but all of this like bright and exciting color stuff that I would never have expected. So I just always feel awed and
Mhm.
lucky when I get art back. And it's just the most incredible experience. And the team at Tundra, they are the best at designing. Their books are just like, I am still, even though I've looked at this book 50 million times, I will still notice something that I didn't notice
Yeah.
when I look at it. It's so cool.
That's the power of a picture book too, right? When it's done well, that there's that component that the additional meaning that's generated from those illustrations just sends the books into this whole other context really for us. So yeah, she really did a beautiful job with this one. Last question I'd like to ask you is, with summer approaching, what are some tips for parents and teachers to really foster that sense of curiosity and wonderment about the natural world?
I mean, I think I would say two things. One is just get outside. And when kids run across something, first off, encourage them to ask questions constantly about everything they're seeing. Like, why is this here? Was this always here? What's missing in this environment? What's here that you didn't expect? What's here that's only here during a certain time of year? So encourage them to like get out and ask a million questions and then follow all of those things down different little rabbit holes. So, that kind of like chasing your curiosity is just going to be like an incredible, teaching resource for kids. There are millions of field guides out. There are field guides out for the most specific things. There are field guides out for like, there's actually one called The Ants of New England that is out there. So, get them field guides, get them access to field guides if you can. The other thing I would say is have kids read more nonfiction. I know I'm obviously biased here, but when I was a kid, I had trouble finding books that I really enjoyed. And I remember my teacher being worried that I wasn't reading more novels, and she was saying, oh, she's not reading enough. And then they found nonfiction for me, and I was just off to the races. And so I feel like some kids are really going to thrive on nonfiction and absolutely nurture that because nonfiction can have beautiful stories and beautiful plots and can really help kids, read all kinds of different things.
Thank
So
you.
yeah,
That's
those are my tips.
Yeah, fantastic advice for our families. Well, thank you, Rosemary, for spending time and for creating books that do engage children in wanting to be curious and to learn more about the natural world. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much and have a great summer and happy reading, everybody.